Here we are. Good to
Yeah.
see you again. I got a chance to talk with you on your 70th birthday. That was the first time we chatted. Your
Wow.
70th, you dropped it halfway through the interview. Today's my 70th birthday. And I was like, wow. And I went back and listened to that interview. So it was August 2018.
Right.
And we were talking about process based CBT that had just come out. And then a year later, we talked about a liberated mind. But I went back and listened to the 2018 70th birthday one. It was so good. And it was so good because I think you were on the heels of having been with your family for the
Huh.
weekend, and you
Yeah.
had done some kind of speech to all your kids, and you were just sort of,
Yeah.
spreading wisdom. So given that 70th birthday, do you remember what it was like for you when you turned 70 and what was going on for you then?
When you uh, start adding years, I mean, you do look back and forward and you kind of see things in an arc. And I definitely was doing that on my 70th, is just trying, appreciating the bittersweet quality, the poignancy, the sweetness of family and life and the trajectory of it. But I do wonder sometimes if we had a sense of what it's like to be old when we were younger, would we do a better job of sort of walking through these things and not sweating the small stuff so much and focusing on what's important and the people who are important and so forth. But for sure, that's central to my thinking as I get older.
Mm-hmm. I didn't, again, it's like one of those perspective shifts where I didn't know then what you were working on that's just come out, which is this process-based model that is blowing all of our minds. And I was like, I thought we were done with learning ACT. And that was, I felt like I've got a good handle on these 6 processes and I'm using them. And then out comes process-based therapy. And so this podcast, it's for the general public, but I think that the way that you are shaking up psychology and shaking up our understanding of mental health and human flourishing is applicable to the general public. So
Yes.
I'd love to be able to break some of these ideas down in a way that helps people be able to apply them to their everyday living, which right now is not so easy.
Yeah, I would really like to do that too. And one thing I could say is that's really rethinking what's happened over the last 150 years in terms of psychology, behavioral science, and its role in the culture. And I've come to the conclusion that we've been seriously misdirected, very, very seriously misdirected, and for a reason that is very poignant, which is that our concepts and our analytic tools were driven by an attempt to categorize people instead of empower people. And the reason for that goes back to racism, sexism, classism of the most ugly sort. And we're living inside. We can't even think outside of the system that we're in that is so dominated by normative categories that are put atop people that you try to apply to yourself to figure out what to do in your life, that are contaminated, they're dirty, they're wrong, they're statistically wrong, they're scientifically wrong in a way that's almost missed attention.
In process-based therapy, what you've done is you've almost like opened up all these boxes that were the diagnoses and thrown away the walls and then tried to reorganize all this stuff that's in it under some big categories of things like how are you relating to your thoughts,
Right.
and how are you relating to your feelings, and what motivates you, and what are you doing in your life, like what behaviors are engaging in, and how do you think about yourself. So you've taken these dimensions of what it means to be human, and then you're looking at, okay, within those dimensions, what is healthy and health promoting, and that what gets people stuck. It's just a total different way of looking at things than
Yeah.
diagnoses.
And when you do this, a few things open up. One is this is about you. This is not about a normative category being put atop your head, which is what the DSM, et cetera, is trying to do. So One of the messages, every voice needs to be heard, and what works or not working for your life may be different than the next person. And so you need tools to help you look at, what am I doing and how does it land and what works? Another deep message is, you're not broken. This compartmentalization of mental health, and right underneath it is mental illness, and right underneath that is, some sort of biomedical condition you have. As soon as you say I have, you're in trouble. You're one whole person. Your relationships matter. The organizations you're in that matter. What's happening in the world matters. Whether you slept last night matters. What you're eating matters. And the processes that are involved in mental health. But process-based therapy leads to breaking down of those walls between traditions and between categories, but also between the compartmentalizing that we're doing within the person. And when that's all done, says, now, what about you? Can I tell a personal story just to make sense of this? It's context, and I don't want to throw you a curveball because I know some of this I haven't written about a lot. And so maybe like, what, racism, classism, why are you raising that? My son was born with a muscle disorder, according to his pediatrician. His percentile strength was basically unmeasurable, as 1 percentile. He couldn't hold a pencil, couldn't hold a knife and fork, couldn't cut his own food, couldn't put on his own clothes, couldn't hang on the monkey bars, couldn't. And we were told, it's just a genetic disorder. It'll always be like that. He's never going to be good at anything physical. Don't put him in any team sports. He'll only humiliate himself. And indeed, he'd come home crying because, nobody wanted to pick him for the team. He was the slowest one out there. And we put him in martial arts. And he had a very sweet teacher who just had the faith, and I'd always wince when I'd go to the classes because he would be clearly the less able of all the kids in his martial arts class. And yet he would say, like all of them did, I'm committed to constant, never-ending improvement towards black belt excellence, ma'am. And I'd go like, you're never going to get a black belt, son. I mean, I would never say it out loud, but they don't have like an A for effort in martial arts. And the only thing I can think of is to send him to Max McManus. Max was a strength conditioning coach who taught David Wise, who just won the silver in the Winter Olympics. And we went in and told Max our story. He has a genetic disorder. He's a 1 percentile. He's never going to. And Max looked at me and said, let's see what he can do. And I watched him, and within a month, his strength was up 25%. Within another month, it was up another 25%. He has his black belt. He's teaching in the dojo. He just joined a jiu-jitsu studio and is getting another black belt there, plus his second black belt in karate. Look, I bought into a model that said, you can know your future by where you compare to others on a bell curve, without knowing what the actual processes are that can lead you forward from where you are. Who knows what your history is? As Max said, let's see what he can do. And so we've got people living inside a cage of mental illness predictions, of behavioral health problems, and of loneliness and relationship problems, thinking all they can aspire to is up here. When you give people a DSM diagnosis, immediately they feel relieved and their horizons foreshorten. Look at the literature, hugely. Not just them, their entire family. Let's not expect too much. She has a major depressive disorder.
Mm-hmm. You even do that in learning process-based therapy. One of the first questions you ask folks is, here's a bunch of therapists reading this book, diagnose yourself, and then write about how you feel when you read that diagnosis.
Yeah.
Even if it's like adjustment disorder, like you are adjusting in a way that's not appropriate. There's, it's dysfunctional adjustment. Whereas it's, as a therapist, I'm sitting here often struggling with it. Most of the time, I don't want to write something down, but I have to, because that's how people get paid back, get reimbursed for coming to treatment unless you write something down. But going back to that, the story about your son, I get your newsletter. Mm-hmm. And I get your I guess it's now a podcast, two episode kind of, sort of, is this a podcast or not podcast? And in it, you were talking about these processes as being sort of like a psychological vaccine. Yeah. Based on some of the work that's being done with the World Health Organization. So this can apply to like your son getting a black belt, but it can also apply to refugees, and it can apply to facing a pandemic. And I was listening back to those episodes a few years back. They were all pre-pandemic, pre-war episodes. And back then you were saying, well, we kind of need these things, like we're going to need these. Talk a little bit about that, like how some of these processes are protective factors for when life falls apart on us, which it inevitably does at some point. And for some people, more severely than for others, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, hugely. We know that some of the processes that move you forward in your life psychologically with regard to mental health issues are also the ones that are helpful with diet, sleep, and exercise, are also some of the ones, the deepest ones, that help you deal with prejudice, stigma, but also letting go of some of those things with the stuff that's filled in your head by a culture that, after all, has all those isms. And so that psychological vaccine idea is that let's work on the protective factors that promote prosperity. And ameliorate our problems. They do both. And focus on the ones that are most powerful and most applicable to us. My colleagues, Stefan Hoffman and Joe Sorochi at the Australian Catholic University, have just finished a study in which we looked at every study ever done in the history of the world up through 2018. We had to stop there because it took 2.5 years for us to do this study on processes of change that were shown statistically to be a functionally important pathway of change in any randomized trial for any therapy for any problem. Do you know that almost 50% of the successful mediators were part of psychological flexibility or mindfulness? Psychological flexibility and mindfulness, classically conceived, even before you get into things like compassion, which are an easy step forward, it's right there. Self-compassion, especially, it's almost the same concept as self-kindness, self-acceptance, self-compassion. It's almost the same thing. You keep walking through it, you end up with like 2/3, 3/4 of everything we know about how to manage our life in such a way that we prevent and ameliorate mental health and behavioral health problems. You can summarize with a very small list of processes. So in the World Health Organization trial, what they did was they focused on classic psychological flexibility processes and mindfulness, and with a cartoon book, a graphic novel, and audio tapes so that even people who were illiterate could use it. They worked with people who had lost everything. Either people had developed mental health problems or people hadn't developed it yet. And this was done with South Sudanese refugees in Uganda, and then again with Syrian refugees in Turkey and the EU. And if you hadn't developed a mental health problem yet, but you were distressed by leaving everything and just grabbing your children and sitting in dirt in a tent because it was the only way you could save your life, sometimes with horrors along the way of attacks and rapes and seeing family members killed. And what they found was that it could reduce the future development of mental health problems by 50%. You can go there and get it for free in 21 different languages. But my point being, both as a protective and as an ameliorative package, just teaching people how to show up in the present, notice your thoughts and feelings in a way that's more open and flexible, even when they're hard, showing up in this present moment consciously and focusing on what's important, where it really puts meaning and purpose in your life, and organizing your behavior around that transforms your life. And so our journey in process-based therapy has simplified, but it's also amplified in the sense of focus on yourself as a whole person. Don't let your mind turn you into like a Vita producing machine, or maybe a podcasting producing machine, or maybe a wealth producing machine, or whatever. Don't be careful.
Mm-hmm.